Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Jabbering Jake Podcast. We are at it again, getting up to some nonsense and just talking about what's on our minds this week. I just got my new equipment set up, so I'm working through figuring out the settings for that. So if it's not fantastic this time around, please forgive me. I will work on fixing that for future episodes, but we're going to play around a bit. We're going to have some fun, and we're going to get into it. So I have some announcements first. The podcast is now available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Castbox, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Stitcher, and YouTube. That's right, we are getting out there all over the place, bringing this podcast to as many platforms as we can for your listening and enjoyment. So let's hope that will help reach more people. I also now have a Patreon page, so if you've been listening to this and thinking about maybe I want to donate to that, help fund the continued podcast efforts and keep it going and maybe help it grow a little bit, I do have a Patreon page now where you can go and donate. I currently have 3 different tiers on there with different benefits. You can get shout-outs on the podcast, so I will take some time to personally thank my patrons by name. There's also early access to episodes, and the ability to write into the show to submit topics and questions of your choice to talk about, and potentially the promotion of your own business or social media presence if you wish. So got some exciting stuff up there. If you'd like to give to the show, please check it out. If you don't, this podcast will still be delivered to you for completely free. You will not miss out on anything in the podcast experience if you do not give, but if you would like to, that is one way you can. And I'm hoping as I go along, I'll be able to add some more rewards to those tiers. Maybe add in another tier or 2 at different levels, and just make it a great experience for everyone listening to the podcast, just like I hope that the podcast itself is. That being said, another great way to help the podcast is to give it a like, give it a subscribe, follow, a positive review depending on what platform it is. Engage with it through comments or Q&As when and where possible. I did see on Spotify there's a way to do Q&As and stuff like that. So I may do that for some episodes, and if I do, I will let you know so you can engage with the Q&A. I want this to look, I basically want this to look like those suspicious online product reviews that you see when you're shopping online. And it's like, 5 stars, best thing I've ever used. It made me transcend to the next plane of existence or something like that. We want it to look like those suspicious products, locations, services that have clearly had farmed or bought reviews that are not real and have no negative reviews whatsoever. So if you can rate it 5 stars, depending on what platform you are, 5 stars or could do a 4-star, maybe even a 3-star, but that starts to look a little bit less suspicious. Anything less than that, just like hopefully your mama taught you. If you ain't got nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. But of course, free country, do what you want. I'm not going to stop you. It's your prerogative too. But definitely share this podcast with, family, friends, acquaintances, those coworkers that you work in the office with, but you maybe be like, hey, how's it going? And that's about as much interaction you get. The people you don't talk to. Maybe you live in a city and you take the public transit. You take a train or a bus. Just share it with some random strangers you see. That person sitting across from you. Just go over to them and be like, hey, you heard of this podcast, a Jabbering Jake Podcast? You should check it out. It's pretty cool. And they'll probably be like, hey, whoa, what's going on? As you approach them. Because let's be honest, people that approach other people on public transit are kind of weird, or maybe drunk, because that's usually only a thing, in my experience, that I've ever seen drunk people do. So you may get a weird reaction at first, but then, when they hear you talking about the podcast, it'll be like, oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think I'll check that out. And then, maybe you make a new friend. And you just do that every day with a different person. So there you go. I'm helping you make some friends. Share it with your friends, your family, your pets, your neighbors, everyone you encounter on the street. Sharing the podcast really will help it grow, help get the word out there, help it spread beyond, just the first degree of separation, basically the family and friends that I've talked to. But, as it stands, I really want to thank everybody that has given me such positive support already. I've gotten some texts, some messages, some calls from people just saying that they're enjoying it. And it really encourages me to keep this going. So thank you so much for all the support so far. It's really helping me to get this thing off the ground. And, it's still a very young podcast. We're still feeling our way around. We're still kind of doing a free-form, just semi-structured, we'll call it, sort of stream of consciousness, just telling stories and talking about my opinions on things. I have an outline and notes and stuff like that I go by. And maybe as I get better, there can be less detail to it. But for now, if I don't structure my thoughts some more, we're going to get kind of that episode 1 awkwardness where, it was still a decent episode, but I think we can all agree that episode 2 was an upgrade, and hopefully episode 3 is as well. Maybe a little bit of a downgrade if the sound is... I don't think the sound quality is going to be bad because I got better equipment. I got more insulation up in this broom closet, which, by the way, I am sweating so bad. But, I do it for you people, and I enjoy it, and that's just that, man. But of course, as we grow the podcast, I'd definitely like to explore different, avenues with just bringing it to the next level, right? Maybe add some structured segments. Like I said, if we get any patrons that can submit topics and stories and things to talk about, we can do a segment doing that. Maybe add some soundboard stuff, some music. Maybe do an art contest someday to help create a new logo, a new fresh coat of paint, a face for the podcast. Because right now what it's got is basically just the, one of the anchor. Like you can sort of create one, but it's all, just pre-made assets, which will do the job. But I want it to have a unique touch, and that would be a cool way to involve the listeners, so maybe do stuff like that. And I also want to have guests on here one day. We're going to start it off for a while, with just me, so that y'all don't be like, well, this podcast isn't anything with just Jake, I want to make you people like me first. I mean, I suppose if you're listening, you like me, or you hate me and you're trying to find ammunition to use against me. That's fine either way. Honestly, I appreciate the listen. And, well, like I've heard wise people say one time is, when you're playing a video game and you run into bad guys or enemies, it means you're heading in the right direction. So, if we get some haters, I guess that means we're relevant enough that even people that don't like me are going to start listening, if for nothing else than just the hate. Not that I'm encouraging that, but, yeah, like I said, got the new mic up and running. So I work remotely, right? And it's really nice. It's got some perks. It's got some things that aren't necessarily so great, but for the most part, it is, as the kids say, goated, which just means awesome or cool or rad. But, a lot of times at our work, we'll have meetings on Microsoft Teams, and I remember we were in a meeting, and my supervisor made a joke about taking care of his cats, or maybe it wasn't a joke, it might have been serious, but I interpreted it the way he said it as a little bit of a joke. And mind you, unless I have something to say, I'm usually muted on my mic so that I'm not just providing background noise, or sometimes, there's background noise where I am that would be disturbing. But he made the joke, and I unmuted my mic just to laugh, and then I muted it again. Like, what a world we live in. I know I'm not the only person that's ever done that. It's definitely a thing. I'm sure it's not maybe a thing that everyone does, but it was it was a funny little thing I noticed, and I messaged him like, I can't believe I just unmuted to laugh at your joke, and then muted again. And he appreciated that, I think. I want to get a little motivational again. I ended off the last podcast with a motivational sort of ending, telling people to chase their dreams and shoot for the moon. And that's all true. And I remembered, or I thought of something afterwards that I wish I had said. I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but I guess we always sort of think about things maybe we want to say later. That's how it's been now that I've started this podcast. I have so many ideas popping in my head, like, oh, I should talk about that. And, I try and write them down as quickly or as frequently as I can, but you don't always have I'll try and write it down on my phone, or if I have my computer handy, I'll quickly type it up in some notes. But it's definitely shifted my thinking to where, certain events in my life could become podcast topics. But I wanted to get a little motivational again, to tack on another thing to the message of chasing your dreams, because I thought about it, and I also heard somebody say on a podcast that a life full of rejections or failures is a lot better than a life full of regrets. And man, is that true. I think in most cases you're going to regret the things, or the things that are going to hit the hardest are the things you regret never doing, more than the things you tried and maybe failed at, or it didn't turn out quite how you wanted. So if you're chasing your dreams, even if it doesn't turn out quite the way you want, or you don't hit all those marks exactly, I think that's how you live a life without regrets. And you don't want to live a life with regrets, whether you're living a life for somebody else because you think it's the right thing to do, or you don't chase your dreams because you're scared of that failure. Just get out there and do it. What's the worst that can happen? You try, and maybe you fail, maybe you find another thing. So yeah, and it's okay to be content without getting complacent. And maybe I'm using the wrong sort of terminologies, but I'll kind of explain it to illustrate what I mean. But you shouldn't be uncomfortable with who you are or what you're doing in life. I think you need to be secure. You don't want to be insecure about that. And of course, it can be easier said than done. But there's nothing wrong with continually wanting to improve or keep on with new and or bigger dreams or different dreams if you feel like you've sort of achieved one. As long as you keep your ego and your greed in check. If it gets to the point where you're egotistical or maybe starting to put others down to get your dreams, that's where you got to pump the brakes and evaluate and introspect and see what you're doing. But, I think continual progress is what drives humans. I think it's just kind of our human nature to want to keep pushing new frontiers, and that's what keeps life exciting. If you start resting on your laurels and think, well, I've made it, then you're like, wait, where do I go from here? It's like you reach the peak of the mountain and you feel like, oh, there's nowhere to go up from here. Well, build a plane, build a rocket ship, keep going. And that brings me to an interesting point where the wrong kind of praise or feedback, I think, can be detrimental to progress, even if it's seemingly positive. Now, let me explain this a bit. And I think this is backed up a bit by some sort of scientific, like things I've heard in other podcasts, hormones and chemicals released by the brain. But there's a certain type of feedback, like, oh, you've made it, or like, you're doing well, keep it up. And I have sorry, I've messed that up. The kind of feedback that's like, oh, you've made it, you've done it, you're there. I think that's terrible praise. And I have a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends, he gives that kind of praise. And I remember he told me that about something one time, and I said, "Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate it." But uh, I said I have, but I haven't. And I appreciate the thought, but I think some better praise would be like, "Yeah, you're doing well. Keep it up." And the podcast, I think I heard something similar along those lines. It was called the Huberman Lab Podcast. I really recommend checking it out. It's amazing for people that just want to improve different aspects of their life, all backed up by science and neurobiology. This guy's knows his stuff. But praise like you've made it, or you're so gifted or talented or whatever, could potentially induce that complacency that I talked about earlier, where you're like, "Oh yeah, cool, I'm here. I don't need to keep going," and it could maybe start to stagnate your life, or maybe you haven't actually reached there, and then you start to backslide again, and can fall into things like depression and lack of motivation, and certainly you don't want that. That's anything but what you want. And so that's why I really appreciate the type of feedback that's like, "Yeah, keep like you're doing well, just keep going, keep at it," or "What's next" type thing. Just an interesting little thing I've noticed. So if you know me, and maybe you do, or maybe you will soon through listening to this podcast, you know that I love comedy. But I wonder if I've started to get more cynical about it. And let me explain. The other night, sometime last week at this point, I watched this movie called The Lost City with my family, my brother and my parents. And, it's a movie with Sandra Bullock and Channing Tatum, and it's got Brad Pitt in it too. And let me just preface that I enjoyed the movie. It was a good overall experience. I'm not hating on it. I think it was well done. But I don't know if it's because I'm so into comedy that I kind of see maybe a lot of comedic tropes coming in movies, that movie style of comedy, and maybe it starts to seem a bit contrived. Or maybe it's because I sort of have some of the actors' styles pegged, or maybe it's just that they're better at acting than they are at comedy, or, vice versa or whatever. Or maybe it's just the type of comedy. Maybe it's that situational, over-the-top comedy that I don't really vibe with as much, and I prefer the more subtle jokes, or, crafted bits that, like, actual comedians come up with, and, like subtle word plays, or like big, stories sort of built up, that call back to earlier things and stuff like that. And, maybe that's it, because this was it was a comedic movie, and there were definitely just, I don't know, a lot of times I was kind of cringing at the comedy that was happening. And again, I still enjoyed it, and there was still comedy that, I genuinely thought was pretty funny. But yeah, maybe I'm just getting a little more cynical about comedy. But that doesn't mean I don't have a good sense of humor. I still love comedy. Let me talk a bit about the actors, though. You got Sandra Bullock, who, I didn't realize this, but she's 58 years old, and she looks really good for her age. I mean, I don't know if it's that she's had some work done or not. Maybe she's just got really good genetics or something like that. And it's kind of that business where, you got to try and stay looking good for your life. But regardless, if she has had any work done, it's, really not that noticeable, if so. Although there is an interview out there that I've seen, a clip where she was on Ellen, where she's talked about this like skincare treatment that she and some other famous women were doing that involved lotions or something made with extracts from like Korean baby foreskins, and that is not a joke. That is a real thing that happened. But very talented, and very, like I would never have realized that she was 58 years old. That's older than my parents. And here's the next thing, right? As a 25-year-old heterosexual guy, okay, I can appreciate the beauty of someone like her or someone like Jennifer Aniston, but I can also appreciate the beauty of like guys that are genuinely good looking. And when I say good looking, don't misconstrue it for like, body positivity, right? You should be, we shouldn't be shaming people for the way they are. But here's the thing, right? You can tell the difference between like guys that are made for the screen or look good than just like average Joe Schmo on the street that's like, average looking guy. And as a heterosexual guy, you can appreciate when a guy's, good looking. I think you can acknowledge that. And I mean, let's be honest. If I was like a 10, I'd probably be a celebrity. I would have cashed in on that. But I like to think I'm a pretty average looking guy, and I have a knack for programming, so that's my calling. But like Channing Tatum, for instance, in the movie. I'm not saying he's a bad actor. I don't think that necessarily. But I feel like even if he's not quite on it, he can kind of get away with it a bit more because he's attractive. You know what I mean? And when I say good looking, I mean, there's a general consensus by many people that, find certain facial or body traits like aesthetically pleasing, proportions and stuff like that. And, Channing Tatum's one of those guys. And he's pretty in shape, right? I think a lot of the females would agree. And I don't know if it's just, because I haven't seen a ton of his movies. I think every movie I've seen him in has been, like, comedy. But, like, is it just a thing that he gets naked in all of his movies? I mean, I know maybe that thought's crossed my mind because he has, like, 2 movies where he works as a stripper. But, like, he gets naked in this movie and, we see his butt cheeks and stuff like that. And I'm like, is that just, like, when he's getting signed up for a movie, like, is he telling the director, like, okay, but, like, can I take my clothes off in this movie? I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But now picture this, right? You're Channing Tatum. You're sort of this new hot that a lot of the ladies are swooning over and stuff. But you get cast for this movie, and then you find out Brad Pitt's in it, and you're like, wow, that's a tough break. That's like if you're the best quarterback at your high school, and then you get signed to a team with like Tom Brady or Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, something like that. And I'm really exposing myself as to how much I know or don't know about football, but I feel like it's kind of like that. Like you think you're good, and then you get put on a team with like someone of just another caliber above you, and you're like, oh well, cool, I guess. Movie also had Daniel Radcliffe in it, and for those of you that don't know, somehow he played Harry Potter in all the Harry Potter movies, and my brother definitely thinks he peaked in Harry Potter. I don't necessarily agree. I don't know enough of his other works to make that judgment or not necessarily, because maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I think it's just that because he played that role for so long and it was such an iconic role, it can be hard for actors to shake that, like, people thinking of them as just that character and to, like, branch out. I think he might be short. I don't know if I realized that in Harry Potter, but I don't know. He might be short, or maybe he just had a bunch of tall people around him in the movie. But he had a beard in this movie, and I think he can rock it. I think he kind of pulls it off. Now, this next thing I'm going to say is a spoiler, but he was actually a bad guy in this movie. And sometimes I couldn't tell if his acting was really good or really bad. Like, he would have times where he got angry, like angsty, like bad guy, like angry. I couldn't tell if he was like, kind of going overboard with it, where it wasn't convincing, or if I was just trying to overanalyze it. But and here's the other thing. He was the type of villain, right? There's a type of villain in a movie that's like always wearing a suit. I mean, he was always wearing a suit. He probably sleeps in a suit. He probably has a suit for the shower. I mean, they were on a hot tropical island for most of the movie, and this guy was in like a 3-piece suit. Like, I could walk on a tropical island in a short and t-shirts, and I would be drenched with sweat already. Like, there's no way I am squeezing into a suit in hot weather. Like, no. And my brother said, but what do you mean? It looks good. And I mean, it does, right? Like, I mean, it was a pretty sharp-looking suit, right? Like, But, I mean, just throw on, like, a bad Hawaiian shirt or something like that. I mean, the movie wasn't in Hawaii, but, like, it would fit in a little bit more. Maybe it'd be more comfortable. But I think my favorite character in the show was like just one of the goons, one of the henchmen that worked for him. He was this Aussie guy. His name was Julian, and it was funny in the beginning part of the movie. I sort of thought I saw him walk across in the background, and it almost looked like the camera was about to focus on him for a second, and maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just my imagination. It was like, this dude's important. Then I was like, oh wait, no. And then sure enough, a few minutes later, he was. Dude, maybe I just love Aussies. I don't know. Like, you're something, oi, mate, how about you get in the fucking car? Nah, no worries. Just get in. Nah, don't even worry about it. Like, oh my God. Wow. Really fell apart at the end there. There goes any chances of this podcast getting picked up by Australian listeners. But, the other reason that I really liked him is he just had a killer mustache, like a mustache I aspire to have one day. And fun fact, I think it was actually a group of Australian guys that started the Movember or No Shave November movement. Fun little side note there. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on that movie. And there you go. That is a deeper conversation that I definitely would have ever had if I didn't have a podcast. Speaking of watching sort of movie type things, I've recently been watching these videos of this YouTuber called Stevie playing this video game called Rust, which basically Rust is this online crafting sort of survival game. So you play it online with other people, you log into a server, and what happens is, and when you first start out in the game, you wake up on a beach with nothing but a rock. I mean, literally nothing but a rock. Not even, any clothes on your back. And it's a game where, like, you log onto these servers, and these servers periodically, whether it's a couple days, a couple weeks, it depends. But every so often they get wiped, which means everything that was built, everything that was acquired on that just gets reset. And you sort of start a new adventure. And this guy, Stevie, he makes these long movie-like, stories built up about his different, they call it wipes on the server, which is the time between when the server gets wiped. And, it's nice because it's just a good opportunity to hang out and do stuff with my brother outside of just going to the gym or watching anime. And, I mean, it's just crazy how this guy Stevie can make these several hour-long videos about this game be entertaining. And don't get me wrong, it can be kind of entertaining to watch, like, especially players that are good at games like that, just their skill and stuff like that, build a cool, like, base or compound and stuff like that. But it's really just, I appreciate how he really does a good job of crafting a story, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and just sometimes dropping some of the biggest reveals. And mind you, it's not just the stories. Like, this guy Stevie is genuinely good. Like, so you throw that combination, the best of both worlds together, and it's just a fun time. And I'm a sucker for a good story in anything. If it gets a good story, it'll rope me in. And so that's just been a really fun thing that my brother and I have been doing. And we're kind of getting to the 30-minute mark of this episode as well. So man, it's been a fun, wild ride so far. I can't believe we're 3 episodes in already. Again, thank you all for the support so far. I just can't believe how overwhelmingly positive it's been, how the reception has been so far. And I would encourage those of you out there listening, if you enjoy the podcast, if you could just share it with other people. Like I said, get the word of the podcast out there, because it really does help. We want to help grow this podcast. It's available on all kinds of platforms now. And if you'd like to donate, then check out the Patreon page. It really does mean a lot. And like I said, you by no means have to donate. You'll still get the same podcast experience. Well, you'll still get, nothing will change. If you do donate, then you'll get early access and stuff like that. But if you don't, I'm not going to be taking anything away. I want everybody to be able to enjoy the podcast as it is. So, I guess until next time, thank you all for listening, and have a good one. Bye.